the seventh elite corpse called Decorabia, in the form of a shining eye, and was an inorganic-type demon. He was also one of the 10 elite corpses whose true identity had been revealed before Vikar returned in time. This creature had existed as an artifact inside the treasure warehouse used by the Academy, and later on it was awakened by the demons, becoming a great source of power for them during the era of destruction. Vikar clenched his fists and with a serious gaze began to look at the ground and sank into his thoughts. He was very lucky to have found the opportunity to cut off the root and would be able to avoid a future calamity. His eyes began to shine with determination. He decided to enter among the top 10, access the treasure warehouse and destroy Decorabia. Vikar returned to the train car where the others were and grabbed the doorknob. Slowly he opened the door and began to walk inside, and instead of mocking him, Granule began to look down in silence. He threw the bottle to the ground, lowered his head before Vikar, and began to babble. His face was pale, and he was drooling. Granule began to shake his head from side to side like a madman. Vikar entered the train car and began to observe him with a serene gaze and then nodded his head. Upon seeing this, the eyes of the Baskerville triplets began to shine with joy and a smile spread across their faces. They turned towards Vikar and gave him a thumbs up. It was daytime and the train was passing over a bridge. Vikar felt relieved since he had now eliminated a variable that could interfere with his plan. Several hours later, the train stopped, raising dust. The students got off the train and with a smile began to chat with their friends. Vikar and the Baskerville triplets also got off the train. While our boy was thinking in silence, the triplets began to stretch their arms due to tiredness. Not long after, Granule also got off the train with an exhausted gaze. Vikar's eyes began to shine with joy as something caught his attention. It was already evening and they were in the beautiful city of Dortsmile, which was located in the southeast of the empire. In the middle of the city there was a tower. Vikar's attention was fixed on the tower. That structure, narrow and tall, was the magic tower, wrapped in a spatial magic that not even modern wizards could interpret. He began to imagine Andromalia's ring, and couldn't help but wonder if the tower had the same powers as the ring. The shiny purple ring had the ability to create a barrier. Several men holding flags of the empire appeared. With a cheerful expression, a green-haired man extended his hand, and with a smile mentioned that it had been a long time. This year he had reunited with the students again as representatives of their academies. His attention was fixed on Dolores. While her eyes were shining with determination, she placed her hands over her abdomen and began to show a smile. She was the representative of the Colosseum Academy. Geraggio, a man who wore wolf skin on his head, crossed his arms and his eyes began to shine with excitement. He was the representative of Boot Camp Varangian. A brown-haired woman put her hand on her waist and began to show a smile. She was Lovegood, representative of the Themyscira Women's University. Dolores approached them and with a smile asked how everyone was. Lovegood, who had her hand on her waist, turned toward her and with a smile mentioned that in her opinion they looked the same as last time. Geraggio, who had his arms crossed, mentioned that it had been a little less than a year. The green-haired man extended his hand and revealed that 11 months, 3 days, 11 hours, 43 minutes, and 12 seconds had passed. Geraggio's eyes began to shine with joy and he couldn't help but smile since he remembered that his name was Proud and Cunning. For him his name was still funny. Proud and Cunning began to touch his glasses, and with a serious gaze mentioned that his name was hard to understand for a brain full of muscles. He was the representative of the Magic Tower. Bianca's attention was fixed on them and her eyes filled with confusion. She could not believe that his name was Proud and Cunning. With an expression full of fear and disappointment, Sinclair explained that in the Magic Tower there existed a tradition where the elders gave baptismal nicknames to the younger ones. She continued recounting that, when they wanted to call him Little Soft Cotton, he had said he would give up entering the Magic Tower. According to her, his real name should be something like Hohenheim. With a confused expression, Proud and Cunning stuck his finger inside his ear and started looking to one side. His real name was Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, but Proud and Cunning sounded better. Piggy, who was reading a book, approached them, and with a surprised expression commented that the representatives from each school who were there were all strong enough not to be underestimated. Upon hearing his voice, Bianca's and Sinclair's attention turned to Piggy and their eyes widened with curiosity. While Geragio's eyes were shining with excitement, he began to show a smile. It was said that Geragio, the representative of the Varangian boot camp, when he was in his first year, had knocked out all the fourth-year students and had taken control of the academy. There was also a rumor that his grandparents were a barbarian tribe who lived in the mountains of Adeka and Hek. Philippus began to show a calm smile. The representative of the Magic Tower had never lost even once against President Dollars during the entire University League. It was said that he had so much talent that, after graduating, he would automatically be appointed as a professor at the Magic Tower and aimed to become the youngest master of the tower. Lovegood, who had her hands on her waist, began to stare at everyone else. The representative of the Mizera Women's University not only stood out for her skill, but also for her charisma in dominating people. Therefore, she was called the Peak of the Mizera. In addition, she was active as a dancer in a famous theater company. With a curious look, Piggy began to read the contents of the book. According to what he read, probably in this tournament, Philippus Hohenheim and Geragio would compete for first and second place, while President Dollars would be in third place. The book also suggested that in fourth place would be Lovegood from the Mizera. Sinclair began to observe Piggy in silence, not knowing what to say. With a confused gaze, Bianca asked where Piggy had gotten all this information. Just then, someone extended their hand. It was Philippus Hohenheim. While the sun was shining, he put one hand on his waist, and with a confident gaze realized that it had been very difficult for them to reach the Magic Tower, so he decided to take them directly to their accommodations. Several hours later, night fell and the sky was full of stars. Sinclair, Bianca, Piggy, Sancho, and Tudor arrived at the accommodation. They lifted their heads and their eyes widened with surprise and joy. In front of them there was a beautiful mushroom-shaped lodging. They couldn't believe that this was the place where they were going to stay. Not long after, the cooks of the Magic Tower prepared delicious dishes of meat, fish, and desserts. Tudor changed his clothes, grabbed the fork and knife, and upon seeing so much delicious food, his mouth watered. He couldn't help but smile since the buffet at the lodging was better than he expected. Piggy, who was sitting next to Sinclair, started turning his head from side to side with a confused gaze. He asked if anyone had seen Vakar since he was starting to get worried. With a serious gaze, Bianca began to point at the table where Vakar was. Tudor put the fork on the table and asked Piggy to stop worrying about Vakar and advised him to worry about himself. The students were eating quietly. Each academy had brought 21st-year students, 32nd year and 53rd year, which added up to a total of 100 per school. Of the 400 participants in total, only the top 10 would have the opportunity to obtain an artifact. Bianca, who had her head resting on her hand, began to look sideways with a furious gaze, seeing her expression. Tudor's attention focused on her, leaving him somewhat confused. When one of the students went for some food, he saw that there was nothing left since a man from Boot Camp Varangian put all the food on his plate and walked away with a smile. The plates of the students from the Varangian Boot Camp were full of food. Bianca's attention was fixed on them. She was furious because they had to share lodging with the Varangians, and she didn't like their lack of manners. With an enthusiastic smile, they got ready to fill their plates again and pushed aside the other students since, according to them, in meals, what mattered was rotation, and that meat should keep coming without stopping. They claimed that the key was in the first 5 minutes, because if you let those pass, you wouldn't eat much, and for them, quantity mattered more than quality. The girl shot off to one side, but just before she could fall to the ground, Sancho appeared and grabbed her by the shoulder. With a grateful gaze, she thanked him. While the students from the Varangian boot camp were distracted, Sancho called their attention and mentioned that if they ate everything there would be nothing left for others to eat. Upon hearing his voice, their eyes widened with curiosity and they turned around. With a serious gaze, Sancho extended his hand and mentioned that they were cutting the line, revealing that they were bothering everyone. Upon hearing this, Tudor's and Piggy's eyes widened in surprise and their jaws dropped in shock. The man with the ponytail began to point at Sancho with the kitchen tongues. started staring at him intently and asked where the line was at the buffet, and also why the students from Colasio Academy were making such a fuss. The girl hid behind Sancho, and instead of feeling fear, he began to show a calm expression. Sancho began to get angry. He was afraid of losing muscle mass if he got mad, so he had tried to ignore them. But he knew this was not going to work. The man's eyes began to shine with rage. He clenched his teeth when he saw that he looked like Sancho. He had not been able to recognize him because he was wearing the academy uniform. He mocked Sancho by calling him a coward for having fled after finishing the entrance exam to Varangian. Using his hand, Sancho pushed aside the kitchen tongues, let out a sigh, and revealed that the reason why he had not gone to Varangian was because he had obtained first place in Varangian, but fifth place in Colasio Academy. He thought there was more to learn at Colasio Academy. He crossed his arms and with a serious gaze asked who he was. The man's eyes filled with rage. He clenched his fist and introduced himself as Balasan, whom Sancho had met during the exam. With a mocking gaze, Tutor put his hand over his mouth and mentioned that it was impossible for Sancho to remember someone like Balasan. With a smile, Bianca extended her hand and mentioned that the first place of the Varangian entrance exam had much to learn in Colasio. Sancho closed his eyes and with a smile asked everyone to stop making fun of the weak. Upon hearing this, Balasan crushed the kitchen tongues with an angry expression. He said that he was the leader of Varangian's first year, Boli Balasan, and challenged the first-year students of Colasio Academy to a duel. He began to point at Sancho with his finger and asked him to call his best warrior Sancho, and the others remained silent. With a curious gaze, they began to think in silence. Not far from them was Vikar sitting and eating. Everyone's attention was fixed on him. They began to observe our boy in silence. Balasan felt somewhat confused. While Vikar was eating calmly, Balasan approached him and slammed the table hard. Instead of panicking, our boy remained calm. With eyes shining with rage, Balasan asked if Vikar was the strongest among the first years. Our boy began to gaze toward the ground in silence. Balasan had destroyed Vikar's food. He was furious since just when he had finished cutting everything up, this guy had ruined it all. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, somewhere in the Empire was the train station full of people. It was a Twango station, and on platform number 999 was Bianca, who wore a summer dress and a hat, while on her shoulder she had her purse. With the other hand she was holding her carry-on luggage. She couldn't help but blush and smile since it had been a long time since the last time she had left the academy. Behind her were Sancho, Tutor, Sinclair and Piggy, who wore the academy uniform. With a confused expression, Tutor mentioned that if someone saw them they would think they were going on a trip to some tourist place. He asked Bianca not to forget that they were going to fight. With a serene gaze, she said that then at least they should be somewhat tense. Then she began pointing to one side with her finger. About far from them was a group of students chatting among themselves. Bianca began to point at them with her finger, and while her eyes were shining with confidence, with a smile she made it clear that anyway, in this Olympic survival competition, their Colasio Academy was going to be the best again. The Olympic survival competition had begun. It was a tournament where the four most prestigious academies of the Empire gathered. The first was the Elite Academy, the Colasio Academy recognized for offering the best education in all disciplines. Then there was Boot Camp Varangian, a training center for warriors specialized in melee weapons such as swords, spears, axes, and bows. An academy identical to the Colasio Academy in structure. An educational system would also participate but composed only of women, called the Mizera Women's University. Lastly, there was the host of this edition, an Eastern Academy that brought together those who followed the path of magic, known as the Wizard Training Institute, or Magic Tower. Tutor's attention was fixed on Bianca, and with a curious gaze he asked if this time the headquarters was the Magic Tower. Bianca turned to him, and with a calm expression nodded her head and revealed that the headquarters was in Dorsmile, in the southeast of the continent. Where the Magic Tower was located, it was famous as a resting place. While they were walking through the station, the loudspeaker began to sound, revealing that the Continental Circuit train was entering the station. The next station was Huangdo, imperial capital, Huangdo Station. They approached the train tracks and began to contemplate the train. The eyes of Sancho, Bianca, and Sinclair began to shine with joy, while on the other hand, Tudor's and Piggy's jaws dropped in surprise and astonishment. The train arrived at high speed, it was releasing blue smoke, and in front of it there was a powerful magic circle. The train stopped at the station. Piggy clenched his fists and his eyes began to shine with excitement, since it was the first time he was going to take a magic train. Sancho rested his hands on his waist and with a confident smile mentioned that he had already taken this train once when he had come to enroll. While Piggy was observing the train with amazement, Bianca started pointing at them with her finger and asked them not to make a silly face. Upon hearing this, everyone's attention turned to her and their eyes widened in confusion. With a confident gaze, Bianca began to show a finger and revealed that on this train were also the students from the Varangian Academy and from the Masira Women's University who had already boarded at the previous station. According to her, they could not allow their rivals to underestimate them. While they were talking, several students got off the train. Among them was a man who had a scar on his face and a woman. Piggy's attention and that of the others focused on them. Not long after, the students from Varangian Academy, with serious expressions, began to get off the train. And then, with a smile, the girls from the Masira Women's University also got off the train. Everyone went to the station store to buy some food. Piggy's eyes widened in surprise, as he was surprised to see that suddenly everyone had gotten off the train. Tudor, who had his arms crossed, began to observe them and with a serious expression noticed that the atmosphere was quite tense upon noticing that everyone had gotten off to shop at the store. Tudor extended his hand to one side and with a confident smile mentioned that the students of Boot Camp Varangian must be grinding their teeth at seeing Sancho. With a confused gaze, Piggy extended his hands and asked why they would be grinding their teeth at seeing Sancho. Sancho, who was standing next to him, began to show a smile and his eyes started shining. Tudor closed his eyes and with a smile revealed that Sancho had placed first in the entrance exam of the Varangian boot camp and then had entered the Colosio Academy. Sancho's eyes began to shine with confidence, and he couldn't help but smile since when it came to fighting, he was always ready. While they were talking, Bianca approached them and questioned if Sinclair was in serious trouble. Upon hearing this, Sinclair's attention fixed on her and her eyes widened in surprise. Bianca remembered that she had also placed first in the entrance exam of the Magic Tower, and first in the entrance exam of the Masira Women's University. Sinclair couldn't help but smile and blush like a tomato. They got on the train. Being in first place always made her nervous, since if someone did well, at least they could tie, and if not, they would lose. Piggy, who was reading the train ticket, started walking down the aisle of the train. Tudor, who was behind him, extended his hand and with a smile asked her not to worry too much, since the real aces were the third-year students. Also, according to the data, there were going to be 50 third-year students, 30 second-year students, and 21st-year students. Sancho and the others began to listen to Tudor in silence. With eyes shining with calmness, Tudor began imagining various magical objects. Among them there was a book, a sword, a dagger, and a necklace. He remembered that it was said that if they managed to rank among the top 10 in this competition, they could choose a treasure from the warehouse, shared by all 4 academies. He decided to make sure he got at least one treasure. They arrived at their seats, left their suitcases, and got ready to sit down. For Tudor it was a shame that Vicar had not come with them. Tudor sat in the seat, crossed his arms, and let out a sigh since once again Vicar had abandoned them to team up with other boys. The attention of Sancho, who was sitting next to him, focused on him. With a smile he mentioned that it was said that Vicar had a prior commitment, so it could not be helped. He liked seeing that Vicar valued his promises that made our boy seem worthy of admiration. Bianca, who had her head resting on her hands, started to gaze off to one side and remembered that Vicar's seat was in a separate car. She couldn't help but wonder if he would have problems with students from other academies. Upon hearing this, Sinclair's eyes widened in surprise. Now she was also worried about Vicar. Keggy turned around and his face filled with sweat. He couldn't help but get nervous since more than worrying about the other academies, in reality he was more concerned that that boy was with Vicar. At the same time, in the other train car, There was a boy with purple hair, with a lost gaze. The boy sat in his seat and began to look at the floor. It was Granel of Leviathan, the third son of the Rikudokam Leviathan family, one of the 7 great houses of the empire. He had grown up being praised as the greatest genius within his clan, and until now had never allowed anyone to surpass him. Under a cherry tree was Sinclair, and Granel was watching her from afar. He had ranked 2nd in the entrance exam, and the person who had trampled on Granel was a commoner without surname or lineage named Sinclair. Granel put his hand over his chest and couldn't help but blush. It was his first defeat suffered at the hands of a low-class commoner. However, as time went by, a strange feeling began to grow in Granel's heart. With eyes shining with joy, Sinclair began to contemplate the cherry petals. That feeling had been born from the very moment he saw her for the first time. Her white hair that drew attention, her flawless skin, her large eyes like those of a deer, her delicate and harmonious nose and lips. While she was distracted, Granel and his men were looking at her with love. It was in that moment that he discovered in his heart that he loved her. Although he denied it strongly, it was an inevitable fact. He approached her, started pointing at her with his finger, called her and with a smile asked if she had found a team. With a surprised gaze, she turned around. He tried to get closer to her little by little while reproaching himself for not being able to say anything more than sharp words like commoner. Pointing at himself with his thumb, he decided to let her join his team. Upon hearing this, Sinclair's eyes began to shine with joy and she started waving at someone. With a gaze full of joy, she began to run and passed by Granel. Upon seeing this, his eyes widened in confusion and surprise. He could not help but clench his teeth tightly and feel furious. Behind them stood Vikier, lost in his thoughts. Sinclair extended her hand and with a smile began to talk with him. At the same time, in the train car where Granel was, Vikier and the Baskerville triplets were also there. Granel began to stretch his feet due to tiredness. Our boy's attention was fixed on him, and he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. As if Granel were at home, he rested his feet on Vikier's knees. Our boy started to gaze toward the ground, not knowing what to say. Granel began to stare at Vikier with eyes full of contempt. He didn't know why Sinclair felt attracted to Vikier. He thought the reason was that both were from the lower class. He knew that this time he had to crush Vikier completely, and for this reason he had joined his team. Vikier began to gaze silently to one side. Granel started to take out a bottle that he had under his clothes, and with a furious gaze made it clear that he was going to be the leader of the team, and asked if Vikier had any objection. With a serene gaze, Vikier mentioned that he only cared about Granel doing his role well, and also questioned why he had rested his feet on his knees. The triplets' eyes were shining with rage. They couldn't believe someone dared disrespect Vikier. Granel said that he wanted to stretch his legs but needed somewhere to rest them. He called Vikier commoner and asked if he had a problem being the footrest of a noble. The triplets clenched their teeth tightly and their eyes widened with fury. Granel asked if Vikier wanted to fight, and if he knew what the pain of being poisoned was. Granel prepared to take a sip from the bottle, began pointing at Vikier with his finger, and with a furious gaze told him not to strut in front of him from now on, since if he made a mistake, he would implant a poisonous insect in his body. With eyes shining with evil, Granel extended his hand and poison began to emerge from his hand. He again called Vikier a commoner and asked if he had understood. While the poison was emerging from his hand, Vikier began to gaze toward the ground in silence and sank into his thoughts. Our boy stood up, made Granel stop resting his feet on his knees and decided to go to the bathroom. Vikier turned his back and Granel's eyes began to shine with rage. He asked him what he was doing. With shining eyes, Vikier closed the door, put his finger near his mouth and with a penetrating gaze gave Granel the order to be quiet. With eyes shining with rage, the triplets prepared to give Granel a beating. He clenched his teeth tightly and couldn't help feeling furious and thought that Vikier was crazy. Just then, the triplets grabbed Granel by the head, making his eyes widen in fear and confusion. Poor Granel began to scream. Vikier got out of the train car and started walking. He apologized but knew he couldn't let Granel interfere. Vikier began to contemplate the landscape through the window, knowing that in this Olympic survival competition, they had to achieve results without fail. He knew that only the top 10 had the right to take an artifact from the shared treasure. With that right, he had to enter the treasure, because he had to destroy one of the artifacts that was in there. Vikir's eyes began to shine with determination. He was standing on top of a cliff, and a demonic eye was staring at him intently. This artifact was the inanimate demon, the 7th elite corpse Chilbansi Decoravia. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,